You load 16 tons and what do you get? Another day older and deeper in debt. St. Peter, don't you call me, 'cause I can go. I owe my soul to the company store. It is a very humid Monday morning, and I'm finishing up a listening session to Mind Wandering. And right now he's talking about states of mind and how they affect future decisions and outcomes. That how we are framing ourselves and experiencing the moment, whether that moment is full of the past, full of the future, or full of the now, makes a difference in how we proceed, how we engage with the projects in our life, relationships, etc. So this is something I spend a great deal of time researching and thinking about, and developing tools to help people keep the moment as momentary as possible and not let it get contaminated too much with the past and the future. We need some past, we need some future, but more like a blurry haze around you rather than a very clear, certain future or certain past. We can't really be certain of our past because we cherry pick and we tell stories about things that are not necessarily true. I can give a talk and I can think to myself, people hated it, oh my God, they hate me, nobody's ever going to hire me again. I'm thinking about a past event and imagining how it went over, but that doesn't mean that people hated it. It just means that I imagine that people hated it. So my thinking about the past is not actually the past. It's my thinking about the past in the present. Hey, Biggie, what are you doing on my floor? What are those turkeys doing, huh? Are they eating the garden? Are they eating the garden? Go get them, Wolf. Go get those turkeys. Do it. Go get them. Oh, Wolfie. Yeah, baby. Yeah. That's my girl. That's my girl, Woo. That's my girl. Yes. I know. Want to go see the turkeys? Want to go see them? They're going up to the blueberries. They're going up to the blueberries, Woo. Oh, and there's a woodchuck. There's a woodchuck eating the garden, too. Hey, Chuck, I see you. I'm looking at you, Chuck. I didn't get much sleep last night. It was a rough night. My jaw is aching and I've got like stinging feeling in here and I've got pains in my ear. It's like this whole area is traumatized right now. And I'm exhausted. And my mom was in pretty rough shape yesterday, so I came home to work and help her and do some research for her. Anyway, as I was lying there in bed this morning, feeling terrible, feeling exhausted, and imagining all the things that I needed to do and all the new things that are being added to my plate and contemplating the future, and it sunk me. My body went into this awful state. I felt physically, I don't even know how to describe it. It's not just stress, but it feels like the bottom has fallen out. And I know this state really well. I've spent much of my life there every morning. And as I was laying in the midst of that, a little voice showed up. It pulled itself out of the stewing storm. And it said, "Do you think you can pull back the covers?" That's a bet, by the way. Do you think you can? It was betting me. And, all right, yeah, I can do that. I pulled back the covers. Okay. Do you think you can Put your feet over the side of the bed. Another bet. Okay. Before you know it, I'm up. I'm in the bathroom. I still don't feel good, but I'm up. And as I'm slowly getting myself going, gently putting on socks and clothes and tying shoes, I thought about Annie Duke's book, Thinking in Bets, which is one of my favorite books, and how I make little bets all the time. Do you think you can do this? Do you think you can do that? And I realized that as I was lying there in bed, contemplating the world and a body ill-prepared to deal with it, I wasn't thinking in bets. I was thinking in debts, or more appropriately, I was sinking in debts. When we experience ourselves as somehow lacking, tired, etc., sick, or just time crunched, and then we imagine everything, everywhere, all at once, of course we're going to be inadequate to meet the task, because the task is not a single task. The task is everything, everywhere, all at once. And I can't do it. So it keeps you in bed. And not only does it keep you in bed, but it keeps you feeling terrible in bed, which continues the cycle of rumination. So we sink deeper and deeper into debt. Or as the old song goes that my dad used to sing to me as a kid, you load 16 tons and what do you get? Another day older and deeper in debt. St. Peter, don't you call me, 'cause I can go. I owe my soul to the company store. That's how I felt this morning. But here I am. I'm out and about because I started thinking in bets. I started challenging myself just a little bit. You think you got it in you to pull back the covers? I don't know. Let's see. Can you? I can. And here I am. All right. Upstairs and to work. So the door handle is in. Now I've got to finish the 2 strike holes. I put them into a 2x4, which I ripped one side so that it would be nice and smooth and not have a rounded edge. Now I have to install that, and then the door will be able to shut and lock. 2x4 is in place. And it shuts and locks. Now I just got to paint everything and do some weather stripping and some molding, and it's done. But there is a door. Yay! A free door. My mom had another attack, so the rescue squad took her to the hospital, and I'm up here now to check on her, seeing how she's doing. She's pretty scared. I would be too. I'm working on 2 different skill sets today. Scary downhills and then steep uphills using a Simon-Kruger technique, or at least my version of it. I've got the Lost Nation roller ski race in Craftsbury, Vermont, coming up July 1st. And there is a terrifying downhill on that course that you have to ski 4 times. And it's much less wide than a road. And there's an S-turn at the bottom, which they call a chicane. So you're going 30 plus miles an hour, and then you've got an S-turn at the bottom. And it's really, really scary and dangerous. So this hill here is about a 10% drop, gets me up to about 24, 25 miles an hour. The other side, there, is much steeper and longer. That'll get you well over 30 miles an hour. It's about a 14% slope. So I'm building myself up here, then I go higher and higher on the hill over there to practice getting comfortable in excess of 25 miles an hour and hopefully 30 before the race. But this pavement isn't as smooth as a roller ski loop, so the little bumps from the crushed stone, they tend to wobble your feet and knees at high speed, and the faster you go, the more you get that vibration. So it's terrifying. And then I'm going to come back up each time, and I'm going to film with my Insta360 camera. I'm going to film my version of Simon-Kruger technique, really working on explosive leg drive and higher arm carriage. All right, here we go. The key with the downhill is just to go and to try to turn that anxiety and fear into excitement. You're committed. There's nothing you can do. There's no brakes. So as the speed increases, I'm just trying to learn how to relax and smile into it, even though there's this huge fear response that comes up in me. But I'm just trying to go with it, because stiffening up at high speeds will make you fall. Your legs aren't as resilient, so you got to try to stay loose and smile at the scariness. I'm taking a little extra time in the educational bubble this morning. There's a light rain and it makes a nice pitter-patter sound on the windshield. And I'm listening to the book Cruel Optimism by Lauren Berlant. And I loved the description of the book, but I don't love the book. So before I get into that, let me just tell you what cruel optimism is. It's the idea that we live through predictive lenses, which you'll hear me talk about on a regular basis, that we're always imagining the future and how it's going to go. And that imagination is a prediction. So we are predicting the future. We are predicting how happy we're going to be if we get something. We're predicting the race in the future. We're predicting the book being completed. We're predicting something negative. But much of the time, the simulations we run are optimistic. There's a future that we're moving towards. There are goals that we have. And we look forward to these things. In fact, my dad asks me a question on a regular basis. What are you looking forward to? Because for him, that's it. He's always somewhere else. He has a very hard time being here, being present. He's much more comfortable living in a future imaginary with something that he is optimistically moving towards. Like, I can't wait for that to become a reality. So in this book, Berlant argues that many of the things that we desire, that we imagine in our futures, are cruel because they don't deliver on the optimistic promise. They actually make our lives worse. She doesn't mention addiction to substances like alcohol, but I think that's a great lens to look at this through, that we seek the very thing that brings about our end, but we seek it optimistically. We desire it with a certain positive hunger, but yet it brings about our demise. So in this book, she talks a lot about capitalism. She talks a lot about the structures that we exist within that shape the present, that shape the imagined future. And it's really unfortunate that she uses a postmodernist word salad to do so, because there's some real profound nuggets of truth in here. And the ideas largely resonate with me, but I don't know. I'm going to use the word arrogant. There's a tendency in philosophical literature, nonfiction or otherwise, to just keep throwing big words at you, one after the other, so you don't ever really have a chance to ground them. And I say arrogant because the author doesn't care about the reader, clearly. It's performative. They're representing their intelligence. They're representing their importance. They're showing you that they know more about this than you. In fact, they know more about it than their peers and colleagues, because they don't understand it either. So everybody's trying to outperform everyone else with this linguistic nonsense. Anybody that's ever studied psychology knows that our working memory is pretty limited. In fact, the amount of information that we can process is 4 plus or minus 3 items, which is why phone numbers are 7 digits long, because we can't remember more than that. But the area code is a chunk, so we don't have to remember the area code numbers, we remember the chunk. But beyond that, 4 plus or minus 3. So some people can remember 7, some have a hard time with 2. So when someone throws 15 words at you, that each one of those words is novel and needs definition, and now you've got boom, 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 they're coming right after each other, and you're trying to create an image, you're trying to follow, but before you can fully represent and deeply understand what they might be intending when they choose this particular word, they've already thrown 4 more words that need definition right after it. And they don't stop. And they don't say, oh, sorry, reader, am I throwing too many big words that I haven't defined? Let me do that. Let me tell you why I'm choosing this particular word. This is why I really despise most philosophical writing, because it's not kind to the reader, and there's just too many assumptions being made. But on the other hand, if you watch many philosophical debates, the first 25, 30 minutes will be the two philosophers defining their terms, which can be really tedious to get through, but it's also important. I think there's a middle ground, and that someone like Lauren Berlant, who wrote this book, if she were interested in actually getting these ideas out to a larger audience, rather than saying we are the unelected authorities on this and we're going to dictate how the world sees itself and you're just going to have to go along with it, but to me that feels rather authoritarian. But if she were to say, okay, here's what's going on, and I know this is not typical language or understanding or perspective, so let's break it down. I want you to understand it. I want you to get it. But that's not in this book. So I think it's like an 11-hour book, and I'm really taking my time with it because there's some really useful information in here, and I like it, and a lot of it aligns with my own thinking. But it's just really unfortunate that these very smart people hide their ideas in linguistic nonsense. It's like they're intentionally trying to find the most awkward terms to use when they build their sentences. It's like, yeah, I could say it like that and people would get it, but man, then I don't sound smart. It just sounds obvious. So let me use lots and lots and lots of these novel, abstract, strange words that nobody really quite knows how it is that I'm using them. And you'll know that I'm saying something, because I am saying something, but you won't quite get it, and that'll make you feel inferior to me as the author. You'll think, wow, I must be stupid because I can't follow along. They must be so smart. But what they're really doing is just conning you, because they could have said it so much easier in a way that you'd understand, but then they can't take credit for being brilliant because it just seems obvious. Anyway, okay, enough of that. I'm going upstairs. This piece of spinach looks like Jim Carrey in The Mask, or perhaps the Green Lantern. I often mow after dinner, and today I did what we call the lower pasture, where we used to have sheep and horses way back in the day when I was in high school. And some of my favorite parts of the property. And in there's an old barn foundation, and I've been collecting stones. I want to build a wall and then put a deck in with a tent over it and turn that into a summer office. It's right next to the road, unfortunately, but it's a beautiful spot, and it looks out onto the old buildings and up onto the blueberry orchard. It's nice. It's a cold, rainy Sunday morning, and I'm just finishing some listening to Cruel Optimism. And I always give myself a moment to think about what I was just listening to let it sink in, to process it. Because the author really doesn't give you any time to think about it, to feel it, to embody it. So I want to be gentle with this book and not just immediately dismiss it based on how it's linguistically structured and delivered. And as I sit here, I look over, and in the passenger seat is a lottery ticket, Mega Millions, that I buy for my family every Sunday. Because in my family, talking about the lottery it's a form of entertainment. What would you do with the money? And then also get them an Albany Times-Union newspaper, and they look at the home section, the new homes for sale, especially those on lakes. And they imagine and discuss what they would do with the money, which house they would buy, what they would fix up, etc. And that's something that my family does on a regular basis. And Lauren Berlant in this book would call that cruel optimism, that we imagine brighter futures if only this certain thing would come to pass, but we're chained to a system that will cause us to suffer even if we get the thing that we believe is going to change our lives for the better. And as I think about all this and how it relates to my family, I'm also recognizing that nowhere in this book is there an individual sense of, I don't want to call it agency, we'll call it responsibility. And I'm cautious with that term because we do live within the midst of historical constructs. I'm working in a mill built in the 1800s, and I have to work with the structure of this building and all of its quirks and negative features, but also all of its positive features. I work in the midst of both. And the town I live in and the governmental structures, etc., even my familial structures, they're part of what she would call a historical present, that the present isn't clean, it's not a blank slate. Your present is very much based on the history that led to this present, so you can't have a present that's non-historical. And this is something I write a lot about, how the past shapes not just communities and states and governments and norms, but also shapes you as an individual regardless of the norms that you exist within. And that's missing from this book. That how we frame ourselves in the world is to a larger degree responsible for how we exist in that world. So there are people that live in this community that have the same exact resources available to them and the same historical present, class, race, gender, etc. And yet they have very different frames that they live inside of individually. There are some people that have extraordinary opportunity and what she would call privilege, but yet they live inside of a prison within their own minds. You could easily put me into that category. I have a brain that very much wants to create a prison in the present, and yet most people would look at me and say that I am a person of privilege. But yet my mind, my identity does not see it that way at all and never will, which is why you hear me talking so much about stepping out of the identity structures in the brain, the networks that cause us to see everything as related to me and either an opportunity or a threat. And in my case, most likely a threat. How do I manage this threat? So as an identity, we live in the midst of simulations. We're constantly running these models to make predictions about how this is going to go, otherwise known as thinking. But outside of that thinking process, we can live within a very blurry future, past, present mixture. I can see and feel the present, whatever that means, because I'm going to be focused on certain things in any given moment, and I'm going to ignore others. They're going to kind of disappear from conscious relevance. But also, there's a bit of a future and there's a bit of a past. Just enough to make me function, just enough to allow me to do things and know what things are, and to know that if I touch this doorknob or door handle, that the door will likely open. Okay, that's relevant. And if I go in that direction, I'm going to move towards the door. But what happens when I get upstairs? I don't need to know that. What's going to happen the rest of the day? I don't need to know that. What's going to happen in my future? I don't need to know that. I don't need to imagine that. My brain will want to by default, but I don't need to be consciously jumping into that simulation. I don't need to embed myself as the main character in that simulation. And that's a useful tool sometime, but most of the time it just creates negative predictions that don't serve me and that cause me to get stuck and go into a cycle of rumination where I imagine my life falling apart. Meanwhile, I'm not actually doing anything that could potentially make it better. I'm not taking steps. So, cruel pessimism, I guess I would call that. Anyway, I'm gonna put the phone down, go upstairs and see what happens. I don't know. Taking my dad to a Father's Day car show in town. Used to be something we would do a lot when I was young.
Did you talk to him? You got it right.
It's at the old Vermont Veterans Home. Beautiful old building. Very optimistic color. Isn't that a beaut? Things were a lot easier to work on back in the day, and there was a lot more room to work on them. Wow, so simple. Another week is in the books, and speaking of books, cruel optimism has gotten me thinking about futures and being optimistic, looking forward to things, and just being present to what my mom is going through and how small her window of existence is now. And I'm not talking about time, I'm just talking about how present she has to be to her discomfort and pain and the new condition she's dealing with. And she's just making it through moments. And I understand that, not from a pain perspective, but from a depression perspective. A lot of my life has just been about making it through moments, which has pretty much shaped my process now. So I don't really look forward to things anymore. And I know there's a lot of people that don't even have much of a future in front of them to look forward to things. So it's one of the reasons that my tools and my outlook have become so gentle and so present focused. We don't all have equivalent futures or opportunities. So what can we do to take advantage of this moment and empower it to the best of our ability, to try to reduce the pain as best we can? So for me, in the midst of my own personal challenges, my brain that wants to keep sending me off a cliff, and greater responsibility at my family's farm and helping with my mom a lot more. So despite all that, I've managed to take enough disconnected steps to add up to almost 21 hours of training for this week. So without a plan, without excitement, without motivation, without a future that I'm really working towards, I'm still close to 3 hours a day, just by allowing myself to engage throughout the day, every day. And that keeps me going, it keeps me strong, it keeps me able to deal with what I have to deal with. This coming week, I've got the running camp in Fayston, Vermont, near the Sugar Bush and Mad River Glen ski areas. And then the week after that, I've got the Lost Nation Roll, the first roller ski race in the New England series. A lot of the U.S. ski team will be there, so it'll be fun to test out my new technique and volume of training against extraordinary athletes. But yeah, keeping my head down, taking steps, trying to be as empowered as I can in each moment. See you in the next one.